What happens when Hollywood's most legendary tough guy walks into a den of daytime television hosts who think they can push him around? Well, you're about to find out, and trust me, this is one confrontation you won't see coming. It's a collision of two different worlds, two opposing philosophies of power, and two monumental egos on a trajectory for disaster. On one side, the curated, brightly lit world of morning talk, where opinions are traded like currency and controversy is the ultimate prize. On the other, a man who built his legend not on words but on actions, not on noise but on a potent, terrifying silence. This is the story of what happened when Clint Eastwood, the man who made careers out of staring down bad guys and delivering justice with a whisper, found himself face to face with Joy Behar in what started as a routine promotional appearance but quickly spiraled into television chaos. Before we dive into this explosive encounter, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below because this story is going to leave you speechless. The stage was set. The lights of the View studio were warm and inviting, casting a glossy sheen on the iconic circular table. The air hummed with the anticipatory chatter of the audience, a mix of tourists and dedicated viewers who knew the show's rhythms. They expected the usual blend of banter, hot topics, and celebrity interviews. They had no idea they were about to witness a gladiatorial contest. The cameras rolled live and Whoopi Goldberg, the show's seasoned anchor and moderator, smiled warmly at their guest and the audience. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the legendary Clint Eastwood," she announced as the studio audience erupted in genuine, thunderous applause. This wasn't the polite clapping reserved for a flavor of the weak pop star. This was a wave of respect for an icon, a man whose face was a roadmap of American cinema. He emerged from the wings, moving with the deliberate, unhurried grace of a man who had nowhere more important to be. At 90-plus years, he was a testament to timeless grit, his posture still ramrod straight, his famous squint in place as he acknowledged the crowd with a slight, almost shy nod. He was dressed in a simple, well-tailored jacket and slacks and uniform of understated authority. He settled into the guest's chair, his weathered hands which had held everything from a cowboy's reins to the .44 Magnum resting calmly on the armrests. "Thank you for having me," he said, and the room quieted to hear that unmistakable gravelly voice. It was a voice that had whispered threats that chilled audiences to the bone and delivered lines that became cinematic scripture. It was a voice that commanded attention without ever needing to raise itself. "So Clint, tell us about your latest project." Whoopi began, her tone keeping things light, professional, and respectful. She understood the magnitude of the presence beside her. "What drew you to this particular story?" Eastwood leaned back slightly, his gaze thoughtful. "Well, it's about second chances," he replied, the words coming slowly, each one given its due weight. "The idea that people can change, that they deserve another shot at redemption, even when society has written them off. It's a theme that's always interested me." Sarah Haynes, the show's voice of genial optimism, leaned forward with genuine interest. "That's such a beautiful theme. How do you choose which stories to tell at this stage in your incredible career? You could do anything." A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched Eastwood's lips. "I look for truth," he answered simply, as if the answer were self-evident. "Stories that say something real about the human condition. About struggle, about failure, about getting back up. Hollywood's got enough fantasy. I've always been more interested in what's real." The conversation flowed naturally for several minutes. He spoke about his directing process, economical, prepared, trusting his actors. He shared anecdotes about working with young talent, about giving them the space to find their characters. The studio audience was clearly captivated, hanging on his every word. This was a masterclass, not just in filmmaking but in living. It was wisdom earned over 7 decades in a brutal industry. But at the far end of the table, Joy Behar had been unusually quiet. She sat back in her chair, one arm crossed over her chest, the other hand resting on her chin, a knowing, almost impatient smile playing on her lips. She had been waiting for her moment, studying her prey, and now, as the conversation hit a comfortable lull, she saw her opening. The atmosphere, which had been warm and conversational, began to shift palpably. "Clint, can I ask you something?" Joy interjected, her tone shifting from observational to prosecutorial. It was a jarring transition, like a sudden cold draft in a warm room. Whoopi's eyes flickered toward Joy, a silent warning transmitted in a micro-expression. It went unheeded. Eastwood turned his head slowly, his calm gaze settling on Joy. "Which comments would those be, Joy?" he asked, his voice even giving away nothing. "Oh, you know," Joy said with a wave of her hand, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Your very public support for politicians who shall remain nameless, but who have made some pretty questionable statements about women and minorities. It just seems to contradict this message of redemption and second chances you're here to talk about." The temperature in the studio seemed to drop several degrees. The audience shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't why they were here. "I don't recall making any statements that disparage women or minorities," Eastwood replied evenly, his voice carrying that familiar steel edge that movie audiences knew well. It was the tone he used right before a showdown, but by association. Joy pressed on, a smug tilt to her head, clearly enjoying herself. She was in her element now, the provocator. "Don't you think your political endorsements send a message? That they align you with those kinds of views?" The other hosts exchanged uncomfortable glances. Sarah looked down at her note cards. Whoopi leaned forward, ready to intervene. This wasn't the direction anyone had planned for the interview to go. Eastwood leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking softly. He fixed Joy with a stare that could have frozen water. "Young lady," he began, and the term, though polite on its surface, landed with the force of a slap. It was a reminder of the vast chasm in their age, experience, and stature. "I've been in this business since before you were born. I've worked with people of every background, every color, every political persuasion you can imagine. And I've always judged them by their character, not their party affiliation. Young lady." Joy's voice rose an octave, her feigned sweetness evaporating. "Excuse me, but I think I have every right to ask tough questions of my guests. This is a news program. And I have every right not to answer gotcha questions from someone who's more interested in creating controversy than having a conversation." Eastwood shot back, his calm demeanor never wavering despite the razor's edge in his voice. Joy's face flushed a blotchy red. "Gotcha questions? I'm asking about your public statements, Clint. That's called journalism. Is that what we're calling it now?" Eastwood replied with a slight dismissive chuckle that somehow made the insult even more cutting. "In my day, journalism involved research and facts, not fishing expeditions designed to get a rise out of people." Whoopi tried to wrestle back control of the spiraling situation. "Let's maybe get back to talking about your film, Clint. The audience is here to hear about that." The Joy wasn't backing down. The camera was on her, the conflict was brewing, and she could almost taste the viral clip. "No, I think this is important," she said, cutting off her moderator. "You can't just come on television and expect softball questions when you've made controversial political statements." "Such as?" Eastwood's voice remained steady, but his eyes had that dangerous glint that anyone who'd watched Dirty Harry or the outlaw Josie Wales would recognize immediately. It was the calm before the storm of violence. "Well, there was that whole empty chair thing," Joy said smugly, referring to his improvised, much-discussed appearance at the 2012 Republican National Convention. "You remember? Talking to an empty chair as if the president were sitting in it. Don't you think that was a little, I don't know, unhinged?" She leaned back satisfied, as if she had just played her ace. The studio audience was dead silent now. Even the crew members behind the cameras had stopped moving, sensing that something significant, something foundational, was cracking. Eastwood leaned forward slightly, his large frame imposing even while seated. His voice dropped to that whisper-quiet tone that was somehow more intimidating than shouting. "Joy, let me ask you something." He paused, letting the silence stretch. "How many films have you made? What does that have to do with anything?" Joy shot back defensively, her smirk faltering. "Just answer the question." He pressed, his gaze unblinking. "How many films have you directed, produced, or starred in?" "That's not the point. I'm a television host and comedian," she retorted, her hands fluttering in exasperation. "Right," Eastwood said, the single word laden with meaning. "And how many Academy Awards have you won?" Joy's voice was getting higher, tighter. "Again, that's not relevant to this discussion. How about this then?" Eastwood continued, his tone becoming more pointed. "Like a surgeon selecting a scalpel. How many careers have you launched? How many young actors have you given their first break? How many stories have you told that actually meant something to people, that stayed with them long after they left the theater?" "I entertain people every day on this show," Joy replied, but her confidence was clearly shaking. The foundation of her argument was being dismantled brick by brick. "Do you?" Eastwood asked with genuine curiosity. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you ambush guests and try to create controversy for ratings. Is that your idea of entertainment? Is that what you consider your legacy?" Sarah Haynes, desperate to inject some positivity, jumped in. "Clint, your films have entertained millions of people around the world. What's been the most rewarding part of your career?" But Eastwood wasn't ready to let Joy off the hook yet. He acknowledged Sarah with a slight nod but kept his focus on his primary antagonist. "You know what, Sarah? I'll answer that. The most rewarding part has been working with professionals. People who understand that respect is earned, not demanded. People who do their homework. People who don't hide behind a panel of co-hosts to take cheap shots at their guests." Joy's mouth fell open. "Cheap shots?" "I'm asking legitimate questions about your political views." "No," Eastwood corrected her, his voice firm and final. "You're trying to create a viral moment for your social media clips. You're hunting for a soundbite you can play over and over to prove how tough you are. There's a world of difference between asking about someone's views and trying to ambush them. One is discourse. The other is intellectual dishonesty." "I'm not ambushing anyone," Joy protested, her voice straining. "I'm doing my job." "Your job," Eastwood replied calmly, "is to interview guests about why they're here. I came here to talk about a film I'm proud of, a story about redemption and second chances. You want to talk about politics and create drama. Write a blog." Whoopi made another valiant attempt to steer the conversation back to safe harbor. "The film does sound fascinating, Clint. Can you tell us about the main character's journey?" "It's about a man who's made mistakes," Eastwood said, his eyes still locked on Joy. "Serious ones. But he's trying to do better. He's trying to find his way back. And sometimes, the biggest obstacles aren't the ones in front of you, but the people who want to keep you defined by your past, who won't let you grow, who want to pin you down for something you said or did years ago because it's easier than engaging with who you are today. The metaphor wasn't lost on anyone in the studio, least of all Joy, who was clearly getting more agitated by the minute, simmering in her own indignation. That's a beautiful message, Sarah said, her voice almost pleading for a return to normalcy. Redemption is such a powerful theme in storytelling, but Joy wasn't about to let the moment pass. She saw a final opportunity to land a blow. Speaking of redemption, don't you think some people are beyond it? She asked, her tone laced with false innocence. I mean, when someone consistently supports divisive politics, at what point do we stop giving them chances? When are they irredeemable? Eastwood's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. The corded muscles in his neck stood out. Are we talking about the character in my film? He asked, his words slow and deliberate. Or are you trying to make this personal again? Because if you have a question about me, have the courage to ask it directly. I'm talking about accountability, Joy replied with false righteousness, leaning into the camera. Public figures have a responsibility to their fans, do they now? Eastwood's voice carried that dangerous quiet, the kind that in his films always preceded a storm of action. And what responsibility do television hosts have to their guests, to their audience, to basic civility, to ask the tough questions that matter? Joy shot back immediately, pointing a finger at him for emphasis. No, Eastwood said, the word echoing in the hushed studio. To treat people with basic human decency. Something you seem to have forgotten in your pursuit of a headline. The other hosts exchanged panicked glances. Whoopi was frantically trying to signal the producers off camera, but Joy was too caught up in what she thought was her moment of triumph, blind to the fact that the trap had closed around her. Human decency. Joy laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. That's rich coming from someone who spent decades playing violent characters and glorifying gun culture in your movies. The studio audience gasped audibly. Even by the View's often contentious standards, this was a nuclear option, a deeply personal and professionally disrespectful attack. She wasn't questioning his politics anymore, she was dismissing his life's work. Eastwood didn't flinch, he didn't raise his voice. Instead, he sat back in his chair and studied Joy for a long, uncomfortable moment, as if he were an anthropologist examining a particularly perplexing specimen. He was seeing her clearly for the first time, and a profound sadness seemed to pass over his features before being replaced by resolve. You know what your problem is, Joy? He asked, his voice almost conversational. Enlighten me, she replied, the sarcasm failing to mask her nervousness. You think being loud makes you right, he stated. You think being confrontational makes you brave. You mistake aggression for strength. But all it really makes you is a bully hiding behind a microphone. Excuse me. Joy's voice reached a piercing pitch that made the sound technicians wince. You heard me? Eastwood continued, his voice remaining a steady, low rumble against her screech. You sit here, day after day, week after week, taking shots at people who can't fight back effectively because they're guests on your show. They're here to promote something, to be polite. You use that as a weapon. You think that makes you powerful, but it just makes you small? Petty. How dare you call me small? Joy stood up from her chair, her face now a mottled, bright red with rage. The ultimate breach of talk show etiquette. I've been doing this job for years. I've interviewed presidents, celebrities, world leaders. And how many of them left here feeling like they'd been treated with respect? Eastwood asked pointedly, his eyes sweeping over the other hosts, who refused to meet his gaze. How many walked away thinking that was a professional conversation? Or do they just warn each other, watch out for Behar, she's gunning for you? Jai was sputtering now, her carefully constructed persona crumbling in real time. I don't have to take this from you or anyone else. You're absolutely right, Eastwood agreed calmly, a slight nod of his head. You don't have to take anything from me. Just like I don't have to sit here and let you turn what should have been a conversation about art, about storytelling, about something I believe in, into your personal political theater. Whoopi finally found her voice, her authority as moderator kicking in. Clint, Joy, maybe we should all take a breath here. This has gotten out of hand. No, Whoopi, Eastwood said, standing up slowly, unfolding his tall frame with a quiet dignity that contrasted starkly with Joy's frantic energy. I think Joy and I understand each other perfectly now. You can't just walk out of an interview because you don't like the questions. Joy protested, a note of desperation creeping into her voice. She was losing her prey and with it her moment. Watch me, Eastwood replied with that iconic, flinty squint. The audience recognized it instantly. It was the look of a man whose patience had expired. I came here as a courtesy to talk about something I care about deeply. I didn't come here to be your punching bag for the day. This is live television? Joy shrieked, as if the fact alone should chain him to his seat. You can't just leave, can I? Eastwood asked, already reaching for his lapel microphone. See, that's another thing you don't understand, Joy. Real power isn't about cornering someone on live television. Real power is knowing when to walk away. It's about controlling your own dignity. If you leave now, you'll look like you can't handle tough questions? Joy said desperately, grasping at the last straw. Eastwood paused and looked directly into the main camera, the one beaming his image into millions of homes. His expression was stern, but his eyes held a glint of profound disappointment. Folks watching at home, he began, his voice clear and resonant. I came here today to talk about a film that means something to me, a story about hope. Instead, I got ambushed by someone more interested in viral clips and manufactured outrage than actual conversation. That, right there, tells you everything you need to know about the state of television today." Then he turned his head slowly back to Joy, who was still standing, trembling with fury. "A's for handling tough questions, lady. I've been handling tough questions since before you knew what a microphone was. The difference is, they were usually asked by professionals. By people like Mike Wallace, by Barbara Walters. People who did their research and aimed for insight, not blood." Joy's face was now a shade of purple that seemed medically concerning. All her composure was gone, stripped away by the relentless, calm dismantling of her position. "You arrogant has-been," she finally exploded, the words bursting out of her, ugly and unrestrained. "You think you can just insult me on my own show?" The words hung in the air like the echo of a gunshot. The studio audience was completely, utterly silent. The other hosts looked mortified, their hands over their mouths. Whoopi closed her eyes as if in pain. Even the crew members were staring in open-mouthed shock. The line had been crossed irrevocably, and on live television, Eastwood, who had been halfway to removing his microphone, slowly turned back to face her. For a moment his expression was exactly like the characters he'd played in dozens of westerns. Calm, dangerous, and absolutely done with the situation. The air around him seemed to crackle with a cold, contained fury. "Has been," he repeated quietly, as if testing the weight of the word. "That's interesting. Coming from someone whose biggest claim to fame is sitting at a table talking about other people's accomplishments." The silence that followed was deafening. You could hear the hum of the studio lights, the rustle of a producer's script as they dropped it in shock. "Has been," he repeated slowly, his gaze locking onto hers with the force of a physical blow. "You know, Joy, in all my years in this business, over 60 of them, I've been called a lot of things. But usually it was by people who had accomplished something themselves. By peers. By competitors. Not by spectators." Joy realized too late that she had unleashed something she could not control. But pride, that most destructive of sins, wouldn't let her back down. "I've accomplished plenty." "Thank you very much," she insisted, her voice thin and reedy. "Have you?" Eastwood asked, his voice dropping to that terrifying whisper. "Let's see, you've managed to insult how many guests over the years? Created how many controversies for the sake of controversy? Destroyed how many interviews that could have been meaningful conversations? That's your legacy. A highlight reel of takedowns. I asked the questions that need to be asked," Joy replied, but her voice was shaking now, her confidence shattered. "No," Eastwood corrected her, his tone that of a wary teacher with a failing student. "You ask the questions that get you attention. There's a difference between journalism and performance art, and you seem to have forgotten which one you're supposed to be doing." Whoopi made one final desperate attempt to salvage the unsalvageable. "Clint, please. Joy, why don't you apologize, and we can get back to discussing the film." The Joy whirled on Whoopi. "Apologize? For what? For doing my job, your job," Eastwood interjected, the words dripping with disdain. "Is supposed to be entertaining and informing your audience, not attacking your guests for sport." "I wasn't attacking you," Joy protested, the lie so transparent it was almost pathetic. Eastwood actually laughed. A short, sharp, humorless sound. "Lady, I've been in actual combat. I served my country. I know what an attack looks like. The difference is, when someone attacked me in the service, at least they had the courage to do it to my face, man to man, instead of hiding behind a television show format and a panel of co-hosts." The other hosts were now openly staring at Joy with expressions ranging from profound embarrassment to outright disgust. Sarah looked like she wanted the floor to swallow her whole. The studio audience was no longer on her side, they were watching a public execution. "You think you're so tough?" Joy sneered, her voice breaking with the strain. "Well, let me tell you something, Mr. Eastwood. This is my house. These are my rules. And if you don't like my questions, you can leave." Eastwood smiled. And it was the coldest, most mirthless smile anyone in that studio had ever seen. It didn't reach his eyes. "Your house." He nodded slowly, looking around the studio as if seeing it for the first time. "You know what, Joy? You're absolutely right. This is your house. And that's exactly the problem." He stood up fully now, towering over the seated panel. He was a monument of old Hollywood, a relic of a time when stature was earned through work, not through volume. In your house, guests get ambushed. In your house, disagreement means disrespect. In your house, creating drama is more important than creating understanding. He paused, letting the indictment sink in for everyone present and everyone watching at home. "Well, congratulations. You've built yourself quite a house there." The Joy was practically sputtering, her words tripping over themselves. "If you think you can just waltz in here and lecture me about television, you've got another thing coming." "I'm not lecturing you about television," Eastwood replied, his calm a stark contrast to her chaos. "I'm pointing out that what you do isn't television. It's a circus, and you're the head clown." The gasp from the audience was seismic. This was unprecedented in the annals of daytime talk. "How dare you?" Joy shrieked, completely losing any last vestige of professionalism. "How dare you come on my show and insult me like this?" "Your show?" Eastwood looked around at the other hosts, at Whoopi, the Oscar-winning actress, at Sarah, the accomplished journalist. "Funny. I thought this was supposed to be a panel show with multiple hosts. Turns out it's just the Joy Behar ego hour with some backup singers. Whoopi finally found her backbone. Clint, that's enough. Joy, you need to calm down. Right now. But Joy was beyond reason. A ship dashed against the rocks of her own hubris. Don't tell me to calm down, Whoopi. This man comes in here with his holier-than-thou attitude and thinks he can disrespect me on national television. The only person who's shown disrespect here, Eastwood said, his voice quiet but absolute, is you. From the moment I sat down, you've been looking for a fight instead of having a conversation. You had no interest in my film. You had no interest in my process. You had a script and you were determined to follow it, regardless of the human being sitting across from you. I was doing my job! The mantra now sounding hollow and pathetic. No. Eastwood shook his head slowly, a gesture of finality. Your job would be asking me about my work, my process, my thoughts on storytelling. Your job would be making your audience feel like they learned something or were entertained by something worthwhile. He gestured toward the cameras, speaking past her to the world. Instead, you've spent this entire time trying to embarrass a guest who came here in good faith, and in the process you've succeeded in embarrassing only yourself in this show. Joy looked around desperately for support, for a lifeline, but found none. Her colleagues were studiously avoiding her gaze. The audience was clearly, palpably on Eastwood's side. The empire of noise she had built was crumbling into dust around her. Fine, she said finally, her voice cracking with impotent rage. If you don't want to answer real questions, then maybe you shouldn't be doing interviews at all. Eastwood had finished removing his microphone. He held it in his hand for a moment, then set it carefully, deliberately on the table. The act was more powerful than slamming it down. Real questions, he said, almost to himself. Then he looked directly into the main camera one last time. You want to know what a real question sounds like, Joy? He was speaking to America now, offering a masterclass in his final moments on the stage. A real question would be, what drives you to keep making films at your age? A real question would be, what advice would you give to young filmmakers trying to find their voice? A real question would be, what story are you most proud of telling and why? He turned his head, his eyes boring into Joy one last time. But those questions require you to actually care about the answers. And we both know you don't. You never did. The studio was a tomb. Joy looked like she wanted to fire back, to summon one last, devastating retort, but for once in her long career of talking she was completely, utterly defeated. The words wouldn't come. You know what the saddest part of all this is? Eastwood continued, his voice almost gentle now, which made the critique even more devastating. You had a chance today. A real chance. You had a chance to have a real conversation with someone who's lived through decades of American cinema history. Who worked with everyone from Leone to Huston. Who saw the industry change from the inside. You had a living piece of history sitting 3 feet from you. He picked up his jacket from the back of the chair. Instead, you chose to play gotcha games. Like an amateur blogger looking for clicks. That's not just a waste of your time and mine, Joy. It's a waste of your audience's time. They tuned in for something substantive and you gave them this. They deserve better than this performance you've been putting on. Joy finally found her voice again, but it was a screech, the last cry of a wounded animal. Don't you dare lecture me about what my audience deserves. I've been connecting with viewers for decades. Have you? Eastwood asked as he calmly straightened his jacket. Or have you just been yelling at them for decades? Because there's a difference between connecting with people and just making noise. One builds something, the other just fills the air. The producers were frantically signaling from behind the cameras, but the scene was beyond their control. This was live television and their legendary guest was walking out after completely and systematically dismantling one of their core hosts. Security. Joy called out, a move of sheer desperate absurdity. Get security? Eastwood actually laughed, a genuine incredulous laugh. Security, what are they going to do, Joy? Arrest me for hurting your feelings. He looked around the studio one last time, taking in the stunned faces of the audience, the mortified expressions of the other hosts, and the purple, rage-contorted face of his vanquished opponent. You know, he said, his voice soft but carrying to every corner of the room, I've been in this business for over 60 years. I've worked with the best directors, the finest actors, the most professional crews in the world, and in all that time I've never, ever encountered anyone quite like you. Is that supposed to be a compliment? Joy asked, the sarcasm a thin shield for her utter defeat. Take it however you want, Eastwood replied, already turning to go. But just remember, when people talk about this interview tomorrow, and they will, they're not going to be talking about your tough questions or your journalistic integrity. They're going to be talking about how you completely lost your composure and embarrassed yourself on live television. They're going to be talking about the day you met your match. With that final devastating blow, Clint Eastwood turned his back on the chaos. He didn't storm out, he didn't rush. He walked with the same deliberate, unhurried pace with which he had entered, a sovereign leaving a province of fools. He moved past the stunned audience, nodded politely to a star-struck stagehand, and pushed through the studio doors. They swung shut behind him with a soft, final click. The cameras lingered on the aftermath on Joy Behar standing red-faced and humiliated, her chest heaving, on the other hosts sitting in stunned, ashamed silence. On an audience that didn't know whether to clap or cry. They had just witnessed television history, but not the kind anyone would want to be remembered for. They had seen a legend, not just of film but of character. Remind the world what true strength looks like. It doesn't scream. It doesn't bully. It speaks the truth with calm authority, and when the situation is no longer worthy of its time, it simply, and with immense dignity, walks away. So, there you have it, folks. What started as a routine promotional interview turned into one of the most explosive confrontations in daytime television history. Clint Eastwood proved that even in his 90s he's still the fastest draw in Hollywood. Except this time his weapon was words, not bullets, and his target was hypocrisy itself. Make sure to subscribe for more incredible stories like this one. And let me know in the comments, do you think Joy Behar finally met her match?